24-day period, we sailed nearly 1,600 nautical miles. Our journey took us southeast over the North Atlantic on an exciting yet equally challenging passage. Bruce and I are grateful for our time at sea, providing us with the opportunity to understand the ocean and ourselves in a more meaningful way each time. Our sailboat delivery began from Eastport, along Spa Creek, the maritime district of America's sailing capital. The 6th Street Bridge connects Eastport to downtown Annapolis, featuring brick-lined streets, as well as 17th and 18th century architecture. The city docks and waterfront welcome the International Boat Show each year. Though it is Eastport where you will find the sailmakers, the fine navigational instruments of Weems and Plath, the local boatyards, and the Annapolis Maritime Museum, where the annual sock burning is held at the spring equinox, celebrating the arrival of boating season. Before departure, Customs in the British Virgin Islands advised us to bring a stamped document stating our clearance from our last port. As a new boat with just a year in a local charter company, we did not have a last port of call. So off to Customs in Baltimore, who take care of the Annapolis area vessels. We were treated with a gunboat sighting while waiting for our documents. We would see this boat later in Hampton, Virginia. The last predict wind, offshore weather routing, and departure planning models were downloaded. Bruce and I were on our way, leaving Spa Creek, the Severn River, and headed for the Chesapeake Bay. The beautiful sunsets were awe-inspiring while anchored by Reedsville. It was hard to believe just the day before we spent the entire day wondering if the gale force winds would ever end. A gorgeous sunrise inspired us to pull up the anchor only after we had addressed our steering cable. Turns out that a bolt came loose in the gale. A nor'easter was on the way, so we headed for Hampton, the final resting place for the pirate Blackbeard, and where we would also wait for our offshore weather window to the BVIs. Once at Blue Water Yachting Center, we finished provisioning and installed a new autopilot drive unit sent from the Jeanneau factory. It was nearly Halloween, with a full moon approaching. We thoroughly enjoyed our walks into town. Bruce and I made a few trips to Patrick's Hardware, established in 1895. Patrick's is a family-owned business where you can find just about anything. They are super accommodating to ocean-going folks, as they have sailors in the family. I was particularly drawn to the antiques saved over generations, down to the original safe left from the previous tenants of the building. While in Hampton, we discovered that a second nor'easter was forecasted after the first one on the way. The Salty Dog rally boats were gathering in the area for their departure the following week, and we met some sailors who mentioned that the organizers would be holding a meeting about the current weather situation with input from Chris Parker. Chris Parker confirmed our plan to leave with the west winds, explaining that at times we just have to be ready to take the window, even in the middle of the night. So that Saturday evening, the time came. Our predict wind data gave us the confidence to untie the dock lines and head offshore. Bruce and I knew it would not be the smoothest ride ever, but we hoped that 24 hours would give the Gulf Stream enough time to calm down a little after the nor'easter. On our way to the Gulf Stream, we thought about a couple boats who had left in the morning. The nor'easter had passed faster than expected. Was there enough time before the second nor'easter? Just barely. Sunday the 28th proved to be a nice day of following seas before the wind dipped south, picked up, and then clocked north-northwest. After crossing the Chop of the Gulf Stream around midnight, the seas seemed to level out at 2 to 3 feet. The winds kicked in and we traveled 11.9 knots with a reef in each sail. A few hours later, we caught the edge of the second nor'easter. It blasted us with 30-plus knot winds and 12 to 20-foot swells. By this point, we had already doused the mainsail and furled the jib into a storm sail as we continued on in a southeasterly direction on Monday. We continued to dodge some weather on Tuesday and Wednesday, allowing the wind from the west to push us east. A 10-day forecast from Predict Wind helped immensely in our decision-making process. We were not only able to leave at the perfect time with our departure planning, but we could also study up-to-date ocean current data, wind speed, and direction, as well as plan the best offshore route. For the next trip, we would like to pair the Predict Wind application with the Iridium Go, allowing for both tracking and offshore updates. Our vessel was equipped with Garmin's InReach system. It was adequate for tracking our route and communicating with our contractor while keeping friends and family informed of our location, yet the weather from dark sky seemed to be lacking. Predict Wind would be the comprehensive solution with the Iridium Go.
We had some of the best sailing on Thursday before another wind event. Kelly and I felt in tune with the strength and grace of the Jeanneau 440. We were flying at 7 to 8 knots. Winds coming out of the east at about 16 knots. This is exactly what we had hoped for. Though as the evening came, the winds began to howl and clocked around to the southeast for some stormy weather on Friday and Saturday. By Sunday, we would reach speeds over ground of 10 knots and 22 knots of wind and 9 to 12-foot seas. It was intense, and we had to keep a composure of awareness, complete focus, and clarity at all times. We were in line with the Bahamas now, and pinching the wind as it was coming from exactly the direction we needed to head. We had been beating into the wind, attempting to hold a course close to our desired destination. The weather continued to be rough and knocked out a few key electronics, including wind direction, depth, autopilot, and GPS. It was a little after midnight, and we had about 5 more days of sailing ahead of us using our backup charts and a compass. Self-reliance became very real, and with our experience, as well as being familiar with the waters, we sailed on towards the British Virgin Islands. The weather seemed to let up a bit on Monday. The 9 to 10 foot seas seemed pretty comfortable at this point. The seas were still pretty big and rolling, though we found our rhythm and it was a lot of fun. A sea turtle even rolled up over our deck when a wave crashed across our bow. We gladly returned this sea turtle to the water kingdom.
What's your heading?
Between 150 and 180. The North Atlantic was changing to an intense blue, and the depth of its color just kept increasing as we headed south. There seemed to be a subtle purple iridescence, too, perhaps from the clouds reflected on the surface. The sailing was great, and we finally were able to catch up on some sleep. We also welcomed some extra time for yoga, podcasts and reading, crochet, and just the general enjoyment of being offshore hundreds of miles from land. were about to cross the Tropic of Cancer, the circle marking the latitude 23.5 degrees north. Once named because the sun was in the constellation of Cancer, directly overhead at noon on July 21st, marking the beginning of summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Some of my favorite watches were the transition between a star-filled sky into the sunrise. Porpoises in a rainbow greeted us on our crossing of the 23rd parallel. After a short period of doldrums, we were back at the helm, pinching wind in big seas. Extensive no-wind conditions are commonly found passing into the tropics, so we welcomed any wind, at times made possible by a nearby squall.
Chop going on. You'll get a wave on top of a wave, or a wave on the face of a wave, and then another wave on the backside. You're just like bang, bang, bang.
It's better than doldrums.
Way better than doldrums. Like right here. Wave with a bigger wave. A big trot, followed by a little wave. Got a notch around that one.
The blue color of the sea was like a sapphire by the time we were crossing the Milwaukee Deep. It is the deepest section of the Atlantic, measured at 28,600 feet, part of the Puerto Rico Trench. The island of Puerto Rico emerged before us, and we settled in for a day of sailing south before the winds clocked ever so slightly so that we may point east. It was our first sighting of land and an awesome day.
Navy Dover, U.S. Coast Guard.
The sunset was captivating, yet later darkness would surround us in an eerie squall and an extraordinary lightning storm. I watched St. Thomas disappear, seemingly transported into another world of wind, rain, and electricity. The storms moved directly overhead and in time moved on. The energy was incredible, and I remained equanimous. Out of the night, the twinkling lights of St. Thomas slowly appeared again with a new clarity. I lovingly took in the mountainous landscape with gratitude. We arrived in the British Virgin Islands November 9th. Bruce and I had been offshore for 12 days. It was an amazing morning. Before rounding Great Camenoo, we hoisted our quarantine flag and prepared for our last sail before reaching Tortola. We imagined how the waters would soon be filled with sailors from the Salty Dog Rally and the Atlantic Rally for cruisers. Together they would make up a couple hundred vessels coming from the Chesapeake. We heard news that they also had weather to contend with, at times worse than what we had experienced at 40+ knot winds. The end of hurricane season can certainly be a tricky time to make the crossing. Yet once here, it's clear why so many cruisers journey year after year to island hop, snorkel, dive, and recharge in this mountainous archipelago of over 50 islands, islets, and cays, many uninhabited. The culture is a mix of European, African, and Caribbean. The Arawak Indians first came to the islands from South America around 100 BC, and perhaps Amerindians as early as 1500 BC. Columbus arrived on his second voyage to the Americas, naming the archipelago after the legend of St. Ursula and 11,000 virgins. Sir Francis Drake came to visit the islands 4 times and died that last journey. The main channel of the British Virgin Islands is named in his honor. Pirates such as Blackbeard, Bluebeard, and Kidd sailed the islands, and the Dutch occupied the area in the 17th century. Tourism began later in the 20th century with philanthropist and conservationist Lawrence Rockefeller and Charlie Carey. They brought a building code no larger than the tallest palm tree. Keeping the islands natural is apparent with the partnership between the BVI's National Parks Trust and the Royal Botanical Gardens. They are creating guides that map the location of rare and native plants in the local Caribbean mangroves, coastal scrublands, dry salt flats, semi-deciduous gallery forests, and the upland moist evergreen forests. After Hurricane Irma, it was so nice to see that the British Virgin Islands are alive and well. There is a positive energy, and the rebuilding process is moving along. The season was just about to begin upon our arrival with yacht races, festivals, and the Brokers Charter Boat Show. We are excited to return and explore the islands more intimately, visiting the local produce tents on Tortola for provisioning and hiking on Sage Mountain, the granite rock formation caves and pools that make up the baths at Virgin Gorda, and the 14-mile stretch of white sand on Anegada. We caught a glimpse of the British Virgin Islands on our delivery, and we were happy to bring a new vessel into their charter system.